Congresswoman Karen Bass. She actually wrote the police reform bill that just passed through the House. She's also getting asked by reporters like me whether she's going to be Joe Biden's vice presidential running mate. She represents California's 37th district, includes parts of South and West L.A. Congresswoman, great to see you.
Thank you. It's always good to see you as well.
All right. So let's talk, though, about coronavirus, because that is an area of big concern. A lot of people may not know, as they're getting to know you around the country because of this VP talk, that your background is actually in healthcare. And from a healthcare perspective, what do you think is the most important thing that needs to be done right now when it comes to coronavirus? And how can Congress help in making that happen?
Well, let me start with what Congress can do. First of all, we passed the HEROES Act, probably about a month ago in the House, and it's sitting over in the Senate. And that really needs to be taken up and passed. It needs to pass for health reasons, but it also needs to pass for economic reasons, too, because unemployment insurance is getting ready to run out. People need a new stimulus check. But we also need to massively increase the money for testing, for contact tracing, and for treatment. And so that's number one. But, number two, I think here, especially in California, we're really lucky to have the leadership that we do. Just like the doctor was saying, that, we have done what we're supposed to do here, and we've been aggressive about it. So here you have the best of circumstances in terms of our state leadership, and we're still suffering from this. We do have people coming in from all over the country. And then, even in our state, because I was on a call with the governor, with a lot of members of Congress throughout California, and he was under pressure from a lot of different members who wanted to push him to open up. Now, I don't know if that's where the virus is increasing, but just imagine he knows the health situation and the economic situation. So that's a tremendous amount of pressure. When you're doing everything right, you still have the challenges.
Congresswoman, speaking of being aggressive, Mr. Biden has said he would make masks mandatory. I'm a mask maven. You're a healthcare provider. I'm sure you understand the benefits of masks. Should they be mandatory, and should people be fined for not wearing them?
Yes. Well, I don't know if people should be fined, but I do think they should be mandatory. Let me give you an example. In New York City, for example, they made them mandatory. They were fining people, and then that turned out to be unequal. So in some neighborhoods where they were predominantly African American and Latino, you had 85% of the fines going to Black and Latino folks. On the other side of town in New York, the police were passing out masks. So how about making it mandatory, but then also doing things like making sure that everybody has masks available? Here, I'm at the Capitol right now. You can't walk out of my office without finding boxes of masks and gloves everywhere. So they go out of the way to make it available to us, and that's helpful as well.
Yeah, and Congressman Schiff is talking about putting forward some legislation to mail a mask to every person in the country that wants one. Let's talk about your legislation, the police reform legislation. Unprecedented reforms passed through the House with some Republicans joining you. The Republicans tried to pass their own bill in the Senate. That was blocked by Democrats in a filibuster. So where are we at? Is something actually going to get done? Are you in the process of negotiating with folks on the other side in the Senate?
Well, we will, but not just the Senate, in the House as well. So it was fascinating because my Republican colleagues in the House, they opposed the bill. But in the debates and all, they really didn't talk about the legislation. They talked about everything under the sun, including Michael Flynn and Mueller report, everything but the legislation. So I know it might sound strange, but to me, that makes me feel like we have a real window to negotiate. And a number of my Republican colleagues came up to us afterwards and said, now we want to sit down and talk. So it's part of the process. It failed in the Senate. I've certainly been in contact with our senators, Senator Harris and Senator Booker, because on the Democratic side, they're the ones that carried our identical legislation. And I've been in contact with Tim Scott. So trust me, it just passed last night, but I have a lot of calls of Republicans to make, both in the House and in the Senate. I think we have a window of about a month because the Senate is out of session until the end of July. So my goal is to get something back on the table in a bipartisan fashion. But I was very happy that we had Republicans vote for our bill last night. That was a big deal.
I'm curious about the bill. A lot of conversation about mental health services being incorporated into police services. Is that part of the plan? And have you spoken to people in the mental health service delivery system about how they think this ought to be incorporated? And who's going to pay for all that is my question.
Right. Well, actually in our bill, it was not, but that was more a jurisdictional question because that's, another committee. All of us do understand that mental health services really does need to be a huge component. And in fact, that was a component of the president's executive order. But in typical fashion, that was a bit more smoke and mirrors because he didn't actually say how it was supposed to occur. But, the whole thing about police, and they say it all the time, they resent the fact that we have not provided for communities. And then when communities have problems, we leave it to police to pick up the pieces. And so mental health, homelessness in Los Angeles, substance abuse treatment, there's a lot of services that we have defunded, and we need to refund those services to help the situation with police.
All right, coming up.
We find money when we want to.
And we certainly found trillions of dollars out of nowhere in the last couple months that would have been hard to find because of the pandemic. All right, well, coming up, we're going to continue our conversation with Congresswoman Bass, including that speculation she could be Joe Biden's VP. But there is one job that's open right now. And that, of course, is vice president nominee for Joe Biden. There's so much discussion.
Wow.
Are you being vetted for that job?
No, I'm not being vetted unless it's in secret and I don't know about it. No, I'm not being vetted.
And if you were offered it, would you accept it?
If I was offered it, of course I would.
How times have changed. We hear the first time that California Congresswoman Karen Bass was ever asked about that on camera was on Fox 11's The Issue Is 2 weeks ago. Now, all reports are she is being vetted. So talk to us. What's the deal? Bring us inside. You are being vetted, and do we deserve some credit for making this happen?
No, you specifically, Alex.
You deserve tons of credit, but let me just tell you that those kind of questions have to go directly to the campaign. But my focus is doing everything I can to make sure that next January, we are relieved of what we have been going through the last 3.5 years, and we elect President Joe Biden. I don't think we would have been having the discussion in the last block about coronavirus had he been president.
All right, that's what we call.
We could have had a pandemic with Ebola, and we didn't.
That's what we call a dodge in the politics business. So clearly you're interested in the job. You told us that you're interested in the job. Let me ask the question this way. Joe Biden is an older white guy. I mean, he's spent years and years working with the African-American community. But if he did have you by his side as one of the most important people on his team, what sort of insight do you think you could bring as an African-American woman based off of your life experience that may change the way that he, and in terms the federal government, view the citizens of this country?
Well, let me just give you 2 examples. What we just talked about in terms of COVID, what I've been working on so hard here, if we had a different administration, we would be having really aggressive, focused interventions where we have hot spots. We would flood these areas with testing, with contact tracing, and with treatment. We would bring in ships if we needed to. We would build hospitals like was done in Africa where they didn't have hospitals to deal with Ebola. We would be extremely aggressive. And the other issue, if you look at the whole policing issue that's happening now, it would be wonderful to see President Biden convene people around the country because for the first time, people are beginning to talk about systemic racism and understand the connection between the underlying health, social, and economic issues experienced by the African-American population, the Latino population, and other populations of communities of color. We talk about the reason why COVID is so bad in these populations is because of underlying health issues. And then you also talk about the social issues underlying policing. So this would be an opportunity for a different president to really get on top of this. Instead, we have a president that spends all of his time trying to drive wedges, and he doesn't even care about the 125,000 people that have died, and he exposes people. We're worried about COVID increasing in young people. Why did he have that rally with thousands of young people sitting next to each other, virtually none of them wearing masks? And you know that's going to be a super spreader event. How could you do that as the president?
Dr. Drew,
and so that's what would
Yeah.
happen if there was President
Alex?
Dr.
Biden.
Drew, I'm wondering if you can envision this VP debate with everything she just said against Mike Pence and what that would look like.
It'd be very interesting. And one of the things that you said there about how there was a disproportionate burden in the African-American community, which there has been, except in California, and your district is a representative of where African-Americans are proportionally represented in this area. Are we doing something here different than the rest of the country that's bearing out in the health of the African-Americans in California and Southern California?
Well, that's not my understanding. So you might have later data than I do, but I certainly know that it was not extremely disproportionate like it has been in Chicago and Louisiana. But the last time I got the data, which was probably about 3 weeks ago, it was still disproportionate to our percentage in the population. Has that improved?
I saw 9% present with COVID versus 7%. And it may be wrong data. I may be looking at bad data. But I thought, wow, we must be doing something here different.
Yeah.
And we should take a lap. You should let's take our hat off to that. The other thing, I've got another question for you, Congresswoman, about homelessness. And I'm working very hard on this, and you've mentioned it. You're a nurse. You have a sense of who this population of the streets, you and I know what this is. What would you plan to do to help address that problem here in Los Angeles?
Well, see, once again, I think there needs to be massive intervention. And so, I think that in Los Angeles, oh my gosh, I feel bad for our mayor and our city council and all of the voters, because we voted for billions of dollars to build housing, and we've been doing it. But one of the problems that we've had in Los Angeles is, as fast as they've been taking homeless people and putting them in houses and apartments, new people have fallen into homelessness. There has to be a comprehensive strategy. But, we are lucky in LA because we do have Congresswoman Maxine Waters, and she has been fighting very hard in financial services. Financial services covers housing too. She has massive legislation around homelessness because we have to prevent new people from becoming homeless while we're getting the people who are currently homeless off the streets. And that takes more than the city and more than the taxpayers. It takes federal intervention. And I'm hoping that these things will happen in January when President Biden is sworn into office.
And should you be next to him in that
How's
office? Should you be next? May I come and help? May I meet with you and may we address this issue? We are struggling out here. So I will be pounding on your door.
She's gonna have some Secret Service help to keep you away.
I got ideas, and nurse to physician kind of ideas. I think we'd make a good team.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Congresswoman. We do appreciate you spending some time with us, and it's always a pleasure to talk with you. And we welcome a variety of views. We've reached out to the Republican members of Congress. We hope to have their views here as well. We've spoken with your friend Kevin McCarthy several times as well, and so we appreciate you sharing your views, Congresswoman Karen Bass. What's that?
Thank you.
Yes. Kevin McCarthy has been on.
Come on the show?
He has been on the issue as a few times, so we appreciate hearing his perspective, and thank you for helping with that. We'll be right back.